Under health, and ordinances 2015-21 and 2015-22 at the same time in terms of speakers. And do you want to hear the speakers first, or a brief presentation?
Let's hear from Mr. Huckleberry first, and then let's hear the speakers. Is that okay?
What about Dr. Garcia?
Well, I like Francisco too. We can hear from him.
Oh, can
He's
you?
pointing to King. No, I don't like him. Let's go to the speakers.
Okay, well, we'll give it to Mr. Huckleberry and then maybe pass it to one of you back there, like Ms. Lesher.
Madam Chair, members of the board, let me be very brief. These are two items that are really designed to try and improve how we provide animal care services throughout the county. We've been at this now probably over 2 years to 3 years in a modified position with regard to how we provide animal care services. We have, with the additional shelter capacity that was added temporarily by the tent, we've changed the model of operating, at least the sheltering component, from one of euthanasia to one of adoption. That does not mean it's a no-kill facility. Euthanasia still occurs at that facility. Our goal is to minimize it to the extent possible and to have as many animals as possible adopted through that process. We also have, in this first particular item, is a fee, which is a surrender fee, and it is adopted and it is identical to that same fee used by the Humane Society that operates today. When an animal is surrendered at the Humane Society, a fee is charged. No fee is charged currently at the animal care facility, and we hope that that will continue and continue to be the policy. Unfortunately, we've had some disagreements with regard to charges and how charges are reimbursed to the county in operating a unified animal care system. What that means is that each of our jurisdictions has an intergovernmental agreement with the county, and so it's a voluntary approval of the county to provide those services in the city. We had, and we've been probably at this, I think Ms. Lesher researched how long we've had an intergovernmental agreement with the city, and I think it first started in 1963. And they're typically renewed on 2-year cycles. Everybody's cycle has been renewed except the city of Tucson's, and there's some discussion today occurring over across the street with regard to, I assume, the intergovernmental agreement, as well as the charges that are in arrears that the city does owe the county for continuing to operate the models we've chosen to operate. I had hoped that we never have to use this fee. And that we have enough of incentive to have all of the participating jurisdictions remain in an intergovernmental agreement with the county to provide services. And that's primarily its purpose. It is not intended to go beyond or to extend beyond any jurisdiction that does not presently have an intergovernmental agreement with the county for animal care services. So that's the first ordinance.
Madam Chair, if I could just make a comment on Mr. Huckleberry's comments, because I think I understand what he's saying, and given the history and longevity of our relationship with the other jurisdictions in animal care, I would note that we have not had intergovernmental agreements with PACC Yaqui tribe or with Tohono O'odham Nation, and I would hope in consideration of that we would hold them harmless from this ordinance if we decide to move forward with it, because there's not that history there. And they have a very different way of dealing with animals on the reservation, and I think we should be respectful.
Madam Chair and Supervisor Elias, our view is that this would not apply to anyone other than the jurisdictions who have an intergovernmental agreement with the county. In addition to that, I think it's pretty clear, and in the materials we've given you, is that our position, at least the staff position, my position, is opposite that of the Animal Care Advisory Committee. And we understand it. We understand clearly they have the interest of animals at heart, and so do we. Unfortunately, we need an enforcement mechanism, and that's what this is designed to be. And what I would suggest is that there may be some consternation about adopting such a fee and such an ordinance amendment, but the board has wide latitude in basically how you adopt and how you instruct staff to enforce or activate, which simply means that one of the options that you may have, in addition to simply adoption, is to adopt and defer enforcement until we run into the situation to where we have a jurisdiction who balks at entering into an intergovernmental agreement with Pima County.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Miller.
you know, my concern on this is, number one, is it discourages people from bringing in dogs that they pick up beside the road, that they could normally have just dropped off without a charge. And these animals are going to end up being left in the desert or being dropped off in the desert and dying a long and excruciating death in the desert. This is contrary to the whole philosophy of the Pima Animal Care Center, and it takes the no-kill philosophy back to a kill philosophy by these animals being dropped off in the desert, because I see that as one of the possible consequences of this. And the other thing is, what about people who try to get around these IGAs, for example, use my address and my name to drop off the animals because I live in unincorporated Pima County? That's just an unintended consequence that I see. And, as we look at this, the other thing I would hope is, that we think about those things when we go through it, that people aren't dropping the animals off at, I guess they have something called a dog patch kind of thing. So, thank you.
So Supervisor Miller, are you willing to increase taxes to cover the costs if we don't reach an agreement with the city of Tucson?
Madam Chair, that's something that we need to look at because we passed this bond, and the city of Tucson should in fact be honoring their agreement since they endorsed this bond and they endorsed the new philosophy. They wrote letters in support of it. The issue that we have is we didn't have an intergovernmental agreement in place prior to bonding for this facility. So, it is going to be...
I'm sorry, but we did have an intergovernmental agreement in place.
Not for the increased charges in the new philosophy. We're just trying to negotiate that now. We don't have one for this increased charges. And it's only going to get higher as time goes on. As the facility is built and we need more employees or more cleaning, more window cleaning, all of that. And we end up down the road as the facility starts getting older, you have to do operation maintenance costs on it. So that
we have generally, there's been an increase in the budget, and when the city was under an IGA with us, and I think that IGA still exists until June 30th, is that correct, Mr. Huckleberry?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Miller, yes, we have an intergovernmental agreement that exists today. It's at the end of its 2-year cycle. And all of the things that we're charging the city are included in the IGA. And so what is happening is they're taking selected pieces out and choosing not to pay for them. They chose to, we have a sheltering concept in the IGA. We have a humane treatment of animals concept in the IGA. We have a spay-neuter concept in the IGA. All of those are things that the city has chosen for one reason or another not to pay. They've not paid the capital on the tent, and they refuse to pay the administrative overhead charges that is due the county in operating the facility, which is really perplexing because the county has turned around and paid administrative overhead charges that the city is charging in our billing IGA with wastewater to the tune of $400,000. So I guess it's okay for us to pay administrative overhead, but they don't want to pay administrative overhead.
No, I definitely agree with you that they should be paying. I guess my point is that I'm just concerned about what's going to happen if we do this. And if we can find another solution, hopefully they agree to pay for this since they did support this new philosophy. And the increased cost, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that since we went to the no-kill philosophy, we hired a director, we hired a vet, and we hired some other employees, which have increased the cost prior to the next year's 2-year agreement. So that was my understanding, that's why they were balking at those costs.
Yeah, Madam Chair. I think they just, decided that they didn't want to pay certain things, and they've been perpetuating that philosophy. Now, we're hopeful that cooler heads will prevail, and that ultimately they'll pay their bills, because they are real bills and they're real expenses, and we need to pay them. We certainly do not want to decrease our service levels or our response systems at animal care. That's not what we want. And I think you brought up a good point. In fact, it was highlighted during our call today that we do have Good Samaritans, and we should not in any way penalize Good Samaritans for dropping off animals or surrendering animals. So we need to fix that as well. And so I think, again, when I discussed this more previously, I think even with Supervisor Elias, I said, last thing we want to do is enforce this ordinance. We really want everyone to kind of work together on a uniform basis to provide animal care services in the manner that we believe is the most humane and is on a regional basis, meaning that we can't treat city residents any different than unincorporated residents or Oro Valley or Marana. And so far, everybody in this region believes that, because we have had renewals in IGAs with Sahuarita and Oro Valley and Marana, and they've all agreed that those are charges that are appropriate and necessary, and they're paying.
And I do believe that the city of Tucson, since they did endorse and support that new philosophy, that they should be paying it. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I'm just concerned that if we do this, and it appears that you're going to address that, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, and I think, the concerns you voiced, I think every board member up here has exactly shares those concerns. But as usual with the city of Tucson, whether it's the courthouse, we took over the libraries from them, which relieved them of a $10 million tax burden a number of years ago. The city does not want to be a team player. It continues to seem that way based on the actions that the council has taken.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Elias.
One more question for Mr. Huckleberry, please. Yesterday, a young man asked me a question about how we fund animal care, and why don't you just go over that so we talk about the blend of property taxes, fees to the jurisdictions, as well as fees that go to individual people who use the services there. I was going to say individual dogs and cats and animals, but I guess it's us that uses them, really, So please, Mr. Huckleberry.
Well, it's us that pays the fees.
Yes, Madam Chair and Supervisor Elias. That's a...
Again, please turn off your cell phones.
That's a good question. And this is frankly how we've been doing it for probably 20 and 30 years. So there's nothing new here, although maybe we do need a new model if we're going to have these jurisdictional squabbles. And it basically is we take all the licensing revenues, or all the revenues that come in from animal care, plus the new revenue source, which I think we're quite pleased with regard to donations and fundraising. That's very significant just in the recent, we'll say, year and a half. And I think that's kind of approaching $300,000 or more now, so it's significant. And so what happens is that we take licensing revenues, we take the other revenues that we achieve and the donations, and that's subtracted basically off the operating expenses of roughly $7+ million. And then the cost difference is then apportioned back to each of the jurisdictions in accordance with their documented utilization. And that means how many calls go into that area, how many animals come from that particular jurisdiction. And so it will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It roughly follows population models, but not exactly. And so that's why, when you talk about of that excess amount, 40% is ours in the counties, even though we have about a 36% population in the incorporated area. I think the cities in the 50% range, and the other jurisdictions are smaller. And so that's then the cost that's then paid by each jurisdiction. And what we've done it even more, we've kind of segregated it better to the extent that we also give the licensing revenues back to the jurisdiction. So it's done a couple different ways. But now it's divided licensing revenue back, then utilization and cost back is the difference. And so if a jurisdiction were to, and this is part of the problem, is nobody has the incentive to have increased compliance with licensing. And because we know we probably have data back here that says that we have probably 50% compliance with licensing. And so if you were to have 100% compliance with licensing, a lot of these dollar issues would go away. But the issue is how do you incentivize people to license? And so we've had a lot of debates and discussions about having free chip clinics, go to town halls, do what we can do. But I can tell you that, obviously, I've been county administrator for a few years, but I can tell you our philosophy with regard to how we operate the Animal Care Center has changed completely, and I think to the good. And so we want to keep building on that positive relationships that we've had with the community. And what it's going to take is maybe we have to change the financing model. Maybe become solely a county obligation through, and I think Jack Newman and I had this discussion after the break, with regard to special district or something that takes this, what we have is we have jurisdictional debates back and forth about who pays for what, and the only people who are suffering are basically the animals in the community. So we need to figure out how to get that debate off the table, and perhaps a regional district might be, but that's a whole other series of steps which requires ultimately legislation.
Actually, it's a good idea. Thank you. Okay, we have several speakers. Kathy Sermon.
My name is Kathy Sermon, and much of what I was going to talk to you about, you have addressed some of it, but I was deeply saddened and disappointed when to read this 2015-21 ordinance that will jeopardize the health and safety of innocent animals and ultimately the health and safety of residents. As a volunteer at Pima Animal Care Center, I've been approached by compassionate individuals who have found lost, injured, or deceased animals and have taken the time out of their busy days to bring the animals to PACC for care. They will not do so if they are required to pay $35, let alone $70. And I think we all know that. It just so happens that in the most recent issue of the Aztec Press, which is Pima Community College's newspaper, there's an article that addresses Dog Patch. And the opening leader to the story says, in a rural area of Tucson, between Old Nogales Highway and South Swan Road, there's a plot of land, people live there, and people dump things they don't want anymore, mainly dogs, alive or dead. And there's a series of graphic photographs and so on, and a quite lengthy story about a group of people, volunteers, who are doing what they can to try and address the situation. But the truth of the matter is that if we attempt, if this community attempts to try and charge people these kind of fees, you're going to see more dog patches. And communities choosing not to accept responsibility for their pet population and welfare risk an increase in the number of animals inadvertently threatening the health and safety of residents. We certainly don't need a lot of dead animals hanging around in our washes. Mahatma Gandhi said, the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. As a community, we have made such great progress. Let's continue to move forward and find a better way for the city and county to resolve this issue. But I don't think this ordinance is the way to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Newman?
Thank you, Chairman Bronson, Supervisor Carroll, Supervisor Melendez, Supervisor Miller, Supervisor Elias, Mr. Huckleberry. I've heard you speak about the issue about this particular ordinance passing, and there was already some discussion about the problems that would arise from having this particular issue come about. It seems to be like a fail-safe method that we're looking at, because we know that the issue is because the city of Tucson doesn't want to pay their bill. Last I heard, it's upwards of almost $800,000. And that was just an update from a few months ago from when I thought it was $580,000. Now, the problem, without going through what you already spoke about, having dogs being dumped or being left out there, part of the problem is that when you're dealing with someone to use leverage, and at first let me back up a moment. I want to give credit to Mr. Huckleberry, his staff. They've worked with the individuals, the volunteers. You all have helped us at Pima Canyon Center. We've become a progressive center that we should be proud of, and we're heading in the right direction. I know we can come up with a different solution other than this, and I'll get to that in a moment. But if you're dealing with individuals such as we are right now with the city who don't care, because they haven't had to care about the dogs and the cats, that's been a county function, it's difficult to have leverage over them. It kind of reminds me of a movie I saw just the other night where you had a husband and wife that were fairly wealthy, and the wife was abducted and held for ransom, and they called the husband and told him, "We want your wife, if you want her back, give us $1 million. He said, "Keep her, I don't want her." Well, we're in that kind of situation right here. They don't really care at this point. And the problem arises if we enact something like this, or even have it on the table to be enacted later. It only takes a day for a dog to suffer. Go without eating or drinking for one day, and you'll know what I'm talking about, how difficult that is, just in one day. So now here we would have these animals. There's a lag time between when we know the people of the city of Tucson would eventually replace out these individuals here when they start seeing what occurs. We know that, but that would take time. Eventually they would get upset, they'd vote them out, or they'd raise more heck than you can imagine. But in the meantime, how much time would that take? A month, 2 months, 6 months? Remember, I was talking about one day is all it takes to have dogs suffer. And considering that we brought in the last 18 months, we didn't bring them in, they brought in almost 18,000 animals from the city of Tucson. They average about 14,000 from there. We're not going out and getting the majority of those because we don't have the staff to do so. We'd like to have more enforcement staff to be able to save the many of them that are stuck in backyards and things like that, or stuck in homes, but we don't have that. So people are bringing them in. With regard to the Humane Society enacting that, when the Humane Society enacted that, our numbers went up because people started bringing their animals to PACC rather than there. And the Humane Society has the ability to tell people, we don't want this particular type of dog, or they charge the dog. So they have their own method of doing that. We don't have that. Ours is a public facility and we take all animals. The saving of these animals, saving the savable, rather than necessarily the no-kill philosophy, saving the savable, we have done very well on that, as you know, upwards of in the 80 percentile. What I'm asking, though, is that I realize we have a very bright crew. We have Jan Lesher, we have Dr. Garcia, we have Mr. Huckleberry. I'm asking them to table this for now. Don't make you vote on this. Or you table it and don't vote on it for right now until we see what the city is doing. Because the concern is that once you have it in your pocket and you enact it, or somehow it gets enacted, the animals are going to suffer, for sure, from day one. They'll start dropping the dogs off, or they'll start doing like Ms. Miller said. They'll give us other types of addresses, or you'll have people saying, just say you're from the county and leave them. So rather than get into that type of situation, find another solution. I know you could end up doing that. Don't pay your bill with the water for the overhead. That's $400,000.
I think it's already on the table.
Okay, all right, well, that's essentially what I have. Thank you so much for hearing me out.
Thank you. That concludes our speakers. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair?
Supervisor Supervisor Valdez. It's
I was
long.
gonna say, I didn't think
You
wrote that
both,
down.
you both are right.
Madam
Madam Chair, Mr. Huckleberry, at this point, what do we know about the city's consideration of paying their bills?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Valadez, I think they're talking about it today, and I had actually indicated to the city manager that I'd be placing on the June 2nd agenda both intergovernmental agreements for animal care and the jail, to have them come over and explain what components they don't want to pay and why, and we'll provide the information that says why we believe it's an appropriate intergovernmental agreement. Give them the opportunity to address the board and find out if staff is being unreasonably difficult to deal with regard to their intergovernmental agreements.
Thank you, Mr. Huckleberry. You know, this is actually not an easy one, simply because I hear the message. But I would also caution you that if this board chooses to delay any action, that is only giving you time to make sure it doesn't get to that point. They need to hear from the animal folks at the City of Tucson. And if they don't, we will get to this point. We're not going to have a choice. So I'm going to move today to continue this item to the June 2nd Board of Supervisors meeting for consideration subsequent to those two items you spoke of, Mr. Huckleberry.
Second.
Motion and a second, and I would add the comment that I do think you need to show up at the city council hearings, meetings, and we need city residents.
Madam Chair.
One of the things that.
No, Jack, you need to
get on
the microphone and you need to identify yourself. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. Jack Newman, Advisory Committee. One of the things that we have done, we have shown up en masse at the city council meeting. It's done a little bit differently than here. The mayor, of course, is the chair there, and he selects how he wants it, who he wants to talk. So as we had probably about 100 people at one of the last meetings, we had 2 people selected to speak, and of course I wasn't one of them. Kathy was, and another individual. So there are a lot of people that do go, and we're willing to go again, and we'll continue to go. But it's a little bit different here where you all give us the opportunity to talk and have our 3 minutes. There you're not.
So we're a little more transparent.
Correct.
Madam Chair.
Council people's phone numbers are in the book.
Thank you. That's okay.
I just procedurally, getting an item on the city council agenda, they have a subsector of the council that makes the agenda decisions. I'm just wondering if there is any way to perhaps ask one of the council members to put this on an agenda for discussion, an open discussion with all the people attending being heard. Again, procedurally, I don't know if that's possible, but I know there are at least several city council members who have shown, one in particular has shown an interest in this issue. That's just a thought. Supervisor Elias, you had something?
Yeah, Madam Chair. You know, I looked at this issue along with my staff, and frankly, I was prepared to come here and vote in favor of it today. But I've been moved by the speakers that have spoken to us during call to the audience, and then again as we've considered this item, and your points are well made. Supervisor Valadez, I appreciate the motion that you made, but I'm not sure what their schedule is. I'm not sure what the procedures are. Supervisor Bronson makes a good point. We would be appreciative if we saw a fuller discussion of that would include more members of the public, so that there'd be a fair, more transparent conversation taking place. So the only thing I'd ask is, in your consideration as the maker of the motion, and I think it was Ally that seconded the motion?
I think it was Ray.
Oh, was Supervisor Carroll? Okay. I'd appreciate it if we went to our meeting in July. Gives another month.
Okay.
That way, Ms. Lesher and others have a chance to negotiate some more, and they have a chance to approve their final. And I think we'll be in better shape then, because this is about doing business with our cousins, like doing business with your neighbors. And if it turns out really bad,
Our
they're still there.
Our estranged cousins.
Yeah, they're still there is the point.
Yeah. They
Thank you
are.
very much for that consideration, Supervisor Valadez and Supervisor Carroll.
Certainly, and that would be the July 7th meeting, and I accept that suggestion.
Madam Chair,
Thank you, Jack.
as a seconder, I approve of the July date instead of June. But I would like to say to Jack and all those, yes it is, all those friends of the animal
He's
care.
getting sleepy.
All the friends of the animal care, including Jack and all the others that are here today. All these council people have phone numbers. Please don't wait until you can possibly get approval from the mayor. Okay? If you wanted to get a hold of me, I'm sure you could find my number in a hurry. And
Oh, I'm sure
I
he's
would
got your
suggest
number.
you get on the phone to these council people. And as I said recently, if I put on my political hat, 3 of them are up for election right now. And then you've got the mayor up for election. I would suggest that you call them and discuss them in very detailed what your concern is and how it might affect their election hopes.
Another alternative, we can certainly, and I think the motion on the floor now is to delay this till the 7th of July. But the other alternative is to invite the council to a joint meeting to have this discussion. Oh, I have one board member who doesn't like, probably never speak to me again, no.
You have all our chairs, you can put them on.
Uh-huh. All right, thank you, Mr. Newman. There is a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, are there any objections to the continuance? Hearing no objection, motion carries and will continue till July 7th. And I take it we're not going to ask for a joint meeting to discuss this.
I think we can on the 7th,
Okay,
if we need to.
all right,
That gives us another option, and it gives us all time to consider that.
all right, thank you. Okay, there were no objections, so the motion carries unanimous. Oh, Mr. Huckleberry.
Madam Chair, I assume you're continuing both ordinances, which are fine.
No, just
No,
one.
just the one.
Okay, all right.
That's the only one that,